You're muted, Andrew. We can't hear you.
Good.
Right.
So you weren't hearing me before then? You weren't hearing me
Nope.
before?
Nope. You
Wow.
No,
spoke for a whole minute.
I'm now
You
hearing
spoke
you.
for a whole minute and 10 seconds. Nobody heard a word you said.
I'm sorry. So let me repeat what I said. I'm sorry. Across the
Yeah.
Caribbean, from Jamaica to Trinidad, from Haiti to Venezuela, we are witnessing a quiet war, not a war with bombs and bullets, but one fought with death, disaster, and deception. Each time our region faces a crisis, whether it's a hurricane, an oil boom, or political unrest, foreign powers and corporate interests seem to benefit the most. They call it aid and development, but many of us are starting to see it for what it truly is: disaster capitalism. This afternoon, we're asking the critical questions: is the Caribbean being deliberately kept weak, divided, and dependent? Who really profits when our nations rebuild? And how can we defend our sovereignty in this new global battlefield for influence and resources? Joining me are two powerful voices who have studied and spoken out against these global economic manipulations: Mr. Gerald Pereira from Guyana, political analyst and theologian, and also a scholar, and Mr. Fred Corbin, a geopolitical analyst, civil engineer, and I would say just a great person and all-rounder in every sense of the word. Gentlemen, welcome to another program, to another session.
Yeah,
Glad
thank
to be
you.
here, brother.
Yes. Okay, so today we're going to look at disaster capitalism. And how would you define, Mr. Pereira, disaster capitalism?
Well, I think it that Naomi Klein wrote this book called Shock Doctrine,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and apart from that book, many political economists and anti-imperialists spoke about the exploitation of natural or man-made disasters, like whether it's earthquake, hurricanes, epidemics, or what have you, where the capitalists moved in and used these disasters to maximize their profits or benefit from what is taking place, the destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Yes.
have examples of that where when Tony Blair and the Americans and Bush came up with this whole this lie that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. They destroyed Iraq, and after destroying Iraq, Dick Cheney's company, of which he's the vice president, Halliburton, they went
Mm-hmm.
into Iraq to do the reconstruction, do a lot of
Yes.
reconstruction. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but this disaster capitalism, it has its roots in goes back to the what you call the Chicago School of Economics with Milton Friedman. Those who shaped the neoliberal
Yes.
ideology, and Milton Friedman argued that only when you have a crisis, and it's an actual crisis or perceive, right, that you can produce real change. So they tried it in
Yeah.
after the coup d'état that when they overthrew Salvador Allende government and killed
Mm-hmm.
Allende, and with Pinochet they imposed with all of this, thousands of people died, people disappeared, and they imposed this this new liberal capitalist ideology, and they implemented it in Chile, and Chile went through it for years.
Yeah.
It concentrated wealth in fewer and fewer hands, and things that were companies, entities that were nationalized were privatized, handed back to the old owners and all of that.
Correct. Mr. Corbin?
But
Go ahead, Mr. Mm-hmm.
it has its roots in the Chicago School of Economics, we call it Chicago Boys, led by Milton Friedman.
Correct. You're correct. And I did read that book, Neil McLean, years ago, and it was really engaging, and I learned a lot. Mr. Corbin, how would you define it in your words?
Well, thank you very much for that question, Andrew. And I'd like to reinforce what our brother here, Mr. Pereira, has said in having its roots in the Milton Friedman ideology that was put forward in his discourse in publication. with what he actually put forward, but what he did not realize was the level to which the global capitalist genre, as it were going to take and maximize the capital for putting it into place as political doctrine in
Mm-hmm.
almost every single country.
Yes.
It became political doctrine, and when
Mm-hmm.
you have of that level of powerful dialogue coming in to economies that are already beholden to the hegemony of the United States of America, particularly in the Caribbean in which we live, you have the recipe for the the ideologue that the all-powerful private sector must be put in command, and government is going to do their bidding based on a policy that is put
Yes.
forward as part of the fixture.
Correct.
And that is where we are today.
Yes.
Based
Yes.
on and actually since the beginning of 2020,
Mm-hmm.
where we see the whole narrative of climate crisis being allied to the private sector capitalist state, you see sustainable debt being brought
Yes.
in as a narrative attached to that capitalist mindset,
Mm-hmm.
where sustainable debt slavery is now being sold to Caribbean countries in exchange for loss of sovereignty because of the sale or the proposed transfer of ownership of property.
Mm-hmm.
This is extremely dangerous.
Very deep, very deep. Now, we are hearing. I've been terming it, describing it as a war on the Caribbean. What exactly do we mean if there is a war? First of all, is there a war in the Caribbean? Is it economic, political, or ideological warfare? Mr. Pereira, would you say that there's a war on the Caribbean? Do you think the Caribbean is now under threat?
Of course, it is an economic war and it is an ideological war
Mm-hmm.
because neoliberalism is an ideology. It is a phase of capitalist development, a part of the capitalist domination, and it brings with it. Well, I have pointed out that it's more than economics.
Yes.
Neoliberal ideology is more than economics.
Mm-hmm. It is.
It's an attempt at an anthropology, to reconstruct the human person,
Mm-hmm.
create a human being who, Thatcher once said there's no such thing as society.
Yes. Yes.
So what you have is this atomized, detached individual who is cultureless, rootless, has no obligation to community or anybody. You celebrate all what we have condemned as things that are very negative. Greed is celebrated as good. Look out for yourself.
Yes.
And concepts, deep values, principles such as solidarity, reciprocity, caring and sharing for your neighbor and all of that, those things are thrown out. They're thrown through the window. So the idea is to create this, going beyond the whole classical liberal concept, right? It's a new, as I said, human being who is basically homo economicus. You're stripped of everything. You're just an economic being. You're there.
Yeah.
René Descartes once said, the French philosopher, I think, therefore I am. Well, today, neoliberal ideology is I consume, therefore I am. Yeah.
No, Mr. Corbin, go ahead, Mr. Corbin. Do you think
Well,
it's a
again,
war on?
again, we have to revisit. We have to look at history. Always visit history first.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the present circumstances, and when we look at what we discussed last Sunday with
Mm-hmm.
regard to the reinforcement of the hegemony within the Caribbean region, the war began when the Caribbean region was deciding to become a unified region through the federation. That's
Yes.
when the war really began. We saw Edward Seaga being placed under siege by the CIA.
Hmm.
We saw the destruction of the Federation shortly thereafter. Then we
Yeah.
saw the introduction of CARICOM, which has achieved very little in its 45 years that it has been in existence, and has been used as a hegemonic tool to keep the Caribbean region divided and at odds with itself. And that is the war that we have been up against. And the irony of the situation is this, is that we have Caribbean countries who believe that CARICOM is something to be aspired to, that it has accolades and that the UN is part of this and we have this and we have that. What are we actually holding? Are we holding a basket of empty promises? Or are we actually holding on to Caribbean unified sovereignty that can be exemplified in our achievements and our progress as we move forward? This is
Hmm.
not materialized. This
Hmm.
is not materialized.
Hmm.
Persons such as Mr. Pereira, who are Pan-Africanists, who
Yes.
who should have been brought into the overall and overarching discussion to bring their truth, knowledge, and education to the fight for Caribbean unity based on our Pan-African history and bringing the African continent and the Caribbean together in ways that should have happened 30, 40 years ago,
Yeah.
still has not happened. Yet
Yeah.
we have a prime minister in Barbados that's charging all around the world trying to get Africa to have open skies agreement and this and that and the other and so on. And at the end of the day, it's all run by what?
Hmm.
Nothing more than a flimsy climate excuse to try to link the African continent to the Caribbean region. Again, another failed policy ideology based upon capitalist ideology of get the money first and then we'll work it out later. No, 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 no. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. No, did you mean Mr. Bustamante or Mr. Seca when you said that it was the dismantling of the West Indian Federation? Because that was under Bustamante, right?
Yes,
Not under Mr.
yes,
Yeah, Mr.
yes.
Seaga, right?
And, yeah, and the thing is, at the end of the day, the situation comes down to this: is that
Hmm.
if we had stuck to the principles of
Yeah, I
Marcus
understand.
Josiah, if we
Hmm.
stuck to the principles of Marcus Josiah Garvey, and we had founded those principles of sovereignty based upon the ideology of the real unification of the Caribbean region and what it
Hmm.
meant for us as a people of
Yes.
African origin to be
Yes.
able to bring our region together based upon what we know is to be the
Hmm.
right thing to be done, rather than listening to the people that were just feeding us money whenever we had a complaint, we would be in a much stronger position today as a Caribbean region. Thereby, we would be able to identify
Hmm.
when the economic wars would be launched against us, where we
Yes.
would not be able to, we wouldn't find ourselves acquiescing to the hegemonic requests. Okay,
Hmm.
we would be able to stand on our own 2 feet and say, hang on a second, this is the Caribbean. We know our history. We know precisely what we want to contribute to the global economy. We
Hmm.
want to be sovereign nationals of a unified Caribbean progressive society, and we
Yes.
will not bow to the pressure that has ruined other nations.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that cannot be said for the Caribbean region at this time.
Yes, yes. Mr. Pereira, as a theologian, a lot of times we often emphasize the economic, the political, and the military warfare. But what about the religious warfare? Under the Trump administration, we talk about Project 2025, and many people aren't aware of the spiritual religious agenda that is also a part of that agenda of this control and war. And we see Trump saying, for example, look at what is happening in Nigeria, that he is fighting, he's there to fight on behalf of the Christians. What is this religious warfare about? Because a lot of our people think that religion is dead and it's not an important part of our societies and a part of the empire called the United States. Could you answer that for us?
Look, the overriding that this is very important. First of all, there is what we refer to as North Atlantic theology.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all theologies are contextual.
Yes.
Theology, we have the theology of the empire.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the history, if you look at the history of the Christian church, and even if you look at the history of Islam, you will see, I have pointed this out on a number of occasions, that
Mm-hmm.
all when Jesus started his mission, as well as Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when the two of them started the mission, it was not just, there was no separation of the sacred from the secular such, right? That evolved at a particular time. In Islam, there's no real division between what is considered the secular plane or they are spiritual, right? Everything is interconnected. But because of the revolt against the church in Europe and this thing about separation of church and all of that, and we know the excesses of the church and what was done in the name of Christianity, certainly had nothing to do with the teachings of Christ. So this North Atlantic theology, this theology that came out of West Europe, was used by the church and church scholars, many of whom were quite sexist. Some of the early church fathers, what they wrote about women, you'd want to know if those guys actually dropped from a tree or came out of women. And they justify colonial genocide and enslavement. So theology and the church, much of the church teachings were used by the ruling class and the established churches, right, to justify what the colonial project was all about. Let me give you an example before I come directly to your thing. Take someone like Martin Luther.
Yes.
Who was one of the leaders of the Protestant Reformation.
Mm-hmm.
Look at Luther when he condemned the Catholic Church for many of its doctrines. Mm-hmm. But the same Martin Luther, he got the support of the German, in those days, the Bavarian princess, against Rome. They embraced him. But when they had the peasant wars in Germany, led by people like Thomas Munzer and others who were inspired by the Bible, Luther came out against the peasants. Luther said the peasants should know their station in life. He actually sided with the ruling class. So theology and religion, as we have it in the region, in any part of the world, is not ideologically neutral, because human beings, in their attempt to make sense of revelation, right, what was revealed in the scriptures, they do so not with in what you call a vacuum. They bring their own mindset, their own interpretation. So, for example, you have those the right-wing evangelical Christians. If you look at them and their argument, their teachings cannot be scripture from a point of view of the scriptures. B is justifiable. Yes. I mean, it is not. I mean, there is so many, I don't want to say that, there's so many chapters, verses, texts in the Old Testament, in the Torah, in the Bible, including the New Testament, in the Torah and in the Quran, that if you look at it from a religious and ethical perspective, that is hostile to capitalism. You cannot reconcile the teachings of Jesus with capitalism. No religion, if you look at the heart of it, you can reconcile the teachings of Christ, Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him. Even if you go to Buddha, the teachings of Gautama Siddhartha, you cannot reconcile from a spiritual, religious, ethical perspective with capitalism. You cannot. So what we are saying is that what you're seeing is theology and religion in the service of the empire. Why? Because every great movement for change, be it religious, social, or political, every great movement,
I'm hearing.
whether it's social, political, or religious, in the initial stages, it always attracts the dispossessed, the poor, and the marginalized. And you look at those who go after the prophets, it was always those who represented the entrenched classes who had power. In Jesus' time, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and those people had power. During the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the mercantile class and all of those, because you had people like Jesus and Prophet Muhammad saying there is no difference between a man and a woman, no difference between a master and slave. And this egalitarian concept, what are you talking about? This is revolutionary. So they persecuted the followers of these noble prophets. And when they realized that they could no longer use the method of persecution, harassment, and so, and they eventually won out, what was the best way to do it? Infiltrate it. You accept it with you. You come within, you embrace it, and then you take control of it within. You couldn't, that which you could not defeat from outside, you enter it and destroy it from within. And we had examples of that with even in Russia. That's what people like Gorbachev did. They went into the Communist Party and they marked their time. And when the time came, look what they did to the Soviet Union.
Yep, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct there. That was actually an analogy I was about to draw. That when you look at the Bolshevik Revolution and what it actually did, it was infiltration of the elitists in order to be able to bring it down.
That's right.
And they ended in the destruction of the czars and the overthrow of the monarchy. Okay, and what we had then is moving into a phase where the entire Marxist ideology then became the working class, but that became the state religion. In other words, the Orthodox Church that we see today as part of that is now the fixture of the Russian Federation, which has been virtually reinvigorated by the rise of the Russian Federation and Orthodox Christianity, was left by the wayside in favor of the Marxist ideology that's what the Soviet Union was known for. Okay, and the Soviet Union made massive achievements during that time and achieved quite a large expansion of its global powers during that Marxist ideology in communism. But then at the end of the day, look what happened. Gorbachev infiltrated it, and it all came to an end. I think one of our greatest lessons that can be learned with regard to the marrying of how the capitalism can be used for benefit rather than for negative output is the relationship that you have between India and Iran, in present day India and Iran, and we go back to India and former Persia. And when you look at the civilizational relationship that has existed between those two countries, okay, our language that we use today in the modern world has evolved from them, from the two of those countries coming together and reinforcing their positions. I mean, the thing when we talk about capitalism, are we actually talking about a bond that is bringing countries together, bringing partnerships with regard to how countries work together, or are we just talking about something that had been dreamt up by Wall Street? Okay, and the example I'm drawing here between India and Iran is basically an Aryan heritage. Because when you look at the relationship between Sanskrit and Avestan, those two languages, it is basically a common, almost ancestral spirit, and that connection just flourished for millennia. So the Persian Empire facilitated an early exchange of all of the administration and the artistic ideas and so on and so forth, and then centuries later, the ancient texts of the Panchatantra traveled from India to Persia and was translated and has become the cornerstone of Persian and later global literature. So this is exactly what we here in the Caribbean have never experienced because of our history coming from the prisoner of war status that most of our communities and our islands have been built on. where the colonial rule that then destroyed those civilizations in India and in Iran had then translated that into the Western Hemisphere. And then we had the advent of the prisoners of war being brought from Africa into slavery here in the Caribbean region, and where the entire slave code ideology was put in place to enslave and empower and oppress in order to be able to get the maximum out of it for the benefit of the oppressor. And this brings us back to the same capitalist ideology. Capitalism was making money from the oppressed, and it still is today. There's no difference.
It's Andrew.
Andrew taking a break.
Yeah, I think there's some. No, but it's interesting what you pointed out, because the Aryans, who were part of what was known as Persad, went into India, and some Indian scholars, those like the Dalit scholars, they said that it was the Aryans who really introduced the caste system.
Yeah.
The Aryanization at the time, they introduced the caste system in India. They've said that.
Yeah, and I think.
But there is those two civilizations. You're right. If you go right back and you look at the history,
Yes.
there was very close.
Very.
Yeah.
Very, very close. I think
Very
one of our greatest failings here in the Caribbean is that we don't teach this in our history classes.
No, because it's interesting that you should raise that, because I did something on that, a paper sometime on that, because I don't know if you've noticed that at the height of this neoliberal ideology and a lot of these parties that were advocating free market, one of the things that they started doing with the university was closing certain departments. Like at the University of the West Indies, I don't know if they started back or what, but at one time, they were no longer offering a bachelor's degree in history. Some of the universities, what they were doing was like they took women's studies and they closed the women's studies department and put it under anthropology. So the feminists started making a lot of noise. What they were saying is that you should not, the emphasis was on the STEM subject, right? Science and technology, engineering, maths on the STEM subject. So disciplines like philosophy, theology, religion, and those things that will appeal, give you where you can explore your purpose and and look at the meaning of life, that would force you to think, to question things, and to develop critical thinking. They saw those disciplines as irrelevant, so they start to cut back on them, and government stopped giving scholarships and all of that. But they encourage the STEM subjects. So we're not saying the STEM subjects are not important, but it was all part of this thing. They don't want a human being who's thinking. They don't want somebody, because if you study history, you will understand that history is not about dead events. You will understand that the connection between the past, the present, and how we can gauge the future. So those disciplines, they deliberately cut back on them. So if they were offering bachelor's degrees, they start to, like one university brought back the bachelor's degree, and they could not start it. I think it was at the University of Guyana. And when we inquired why, they said they only had about 4 persons enrolled. So they can't have a degree program for 4. So that's what I'm showing you.
Yeah. Yes.
So you're right. We're not teaching history. No, we're not teaching history. We're not teaching history. Our people don't know the history. They don't even know the history of our region, the Caribbean, much as the history of the world. They don't.
Yeah, the thing is,
It's not encouraged. It's not being encouraged.
no, it's not being encouraged at all. And this is where the subject of disaster capitalism comes in so importantly, because if you do not understand the history of why the region finds itself in the economic and situational issues that it is faced with across the region, every single country has their own. You will not be able to grasp what the solutions could be, and not being able to realize the trajectory of a future engagement by a hegemonic power. Because if you don't understand the history, a hegemonic power can come into the region and tell you anything and you'll believe it. At the
That's
end of
right.
at the end of the day, the situation comes down to this. If we are looking seriously at disaster capitalism and how it affects our societies and how we actually learn from these events that take place, such as Hurricane Melissa in Jamaica, and we have a massive earthquake in Haiti preceding that, and so on, two earthquakes in Haiti, and
Yes.
what has happened historically and how the Caribbean has progressed from that, and learning how resilience and how economics are basically on an upward trend because of how things go, and people rebuilding with new technologies and advancing in building construction and so on and so forth. If we lose sight of that, we end up on a plateau of ignorance
Yeah.
that leads us to the point where we will accept whatever someone hands us on a platter, and we will then be in a situation. We find ourselves in a society where we will only accept what's on a platter. We're not willing to think and work for ourselves as a unified region and prosper and be a progressive influence on the global economy.
Yeah. That's right. Well, yeah, you're correct. If you look at Francis Fukuyama when he wrote The End of History, The Last
Yeah.
Man Standing,
Hmm.
I guess he would disassociate himself with that book now, because he said that, look, I mean, at the end, he said that the neoliberal ideology triumphed. Liberal democracy is the highest. You can't go beyond anything than neoliberal capitalism and liberal democracy. This is this, and this in it, nothing beyond that. And based on that argument, or that pseudo thesis, you get this thing about Tina. There is no alternative.
Yeah.
And then you had those who were talking about the end of ideology. But we've seen that, I mean, Fukuyama now, that book, when you look at what is taking place, you know that is not true. It's not true.
Yeah.
That book, you should be tossed into the rubbish heap of history, because he was doing nothing new. His statement, that was neo-Hegelian, because Hegel believed that under Frederick of Prussia, that when Germany reached, that was the highest.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is a neo-Hegelian statement. So Fukuyama saying that nothing beyond liberal idea, neoliberalism has wind out, and the liberal democratic tradition has won. Nothing beyond that. So if you think that there is an alternative, there's none. But we are seeing that the crisis of this system, this crisis, you're seeing it, because since it has been implemented, good, and in most cases on countries in the global south, it was imposed on them. In Guyana, it was imposed. It came in the form of what is called structural adjustment program, economic recovery.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out earlier, part of this thing was disarm the state. No state-led development, cut back, destroy the public sector. Good? And you privatize everything. Water, in some countries, they privatize water. You open up the schools, you allow endless the amount of private schools you have now. So education is a commodity. Healthcare is a commodity. Everything. And the only role of the state is to protect private capital. The state becomes a watchman. That's the state's duty. So the mantra is leave everything to the mechanism of the market, and it will regulate. It will regulate. But we know that the mechanism only regulates a few. And we also know that, as you pointed out, which is true, this mantra, but private sector. private sector is not in the business of nation building and building country. The private sector does not build countries, develop countries. That's not their role. And that is why Roosevelt, during the Reconstruction, Roosevelt with the New Deal and the Reconstruction, Roosevelt created state-led institutions that pulled America up, and they never looked back at the time. And big business people were calling Roosevelt a communist, because the government was intervening. He was using the state to intervene in the economy.
That's correct. Do you think also that
I'm sorry, brother, just before you go on, look, we have some people who like to talk about Singapore and Lee Kuan Yew and all of that, but they don't really know what happened in Singapore.
No, they don't.
Lee Kuan Yew was very authoritarian. Yes, he pulled Singapore up, but look, the human cost. He suppressed it. You dare not say anything against Lee Kuan Yew. You'll end up in prison. Trade unions were suppressed. Yes, he pulled it, and look at where Singapore, but Lee Kuan Yew was very repressive, and we've seen the history has shown us that this is a myth that you need, that for capitalism to flourish, you need democracy. No. Capitalism can flourish under the most repressive regimes, like we've seen in South Korea years ago, in Thailand, and many other countries, in Brazil, under repressive. Capitalism flourish. Capitalism do far better under repressive autocratic regimes than regimes that even when
I don't think I have to.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the examples that we're experiencing here, where we're seeing the protectionist attitude of the capitalist society, is right at home there in with you in Guyana, where the recent political opponent, or the opposition leader, has basically been called out, sanctioned, and arrested, and then put on bail for being in a position of challenging the government. So where does that lead us with regard to repressiveness and the capitalist society? We can say that Guyana, after the Burnham administration, progressed well down the road towards better capitalism year on year. But at the end of the day, where were the foundations? Where were the foundations? That's what I would like to know. I need to know more about how Mr. Burnham actually forged that in his presidency compared to where we are today. I mean, you live in Guyana. I don't know very much about the Guyana political situation, but I am just very curious as to why there's a repressive attitude towards a young up and coming individual that, even although he may have had some dark marks in his history, is actually commanding the attention of the people. What do you think?
Well, first of all, let me take the thing with Mr. Burnham. Mr. Burnham recognized very early that our independence, our political independence, would be meaningless unless we have economic independence.
Right.
And he embarked on a program of nationalization. We started with nationalizing strategic sectors of the economy. And he implemented free education. And Burnham did not have the wealth that the previous government and this present government have in terms of the oil and gas wealth that we have today.
Right.
But during Mr. Burnham time, when you drive down the street, you go down the streets, you didn't see people begging at every corner. In this oil and gas country today, every corner you pull up in a car, you see people stretching out their hands. We have 1,001 supermarkets, but yet many people are hungry. So Mr. Burnham created state. He established the National Cooperative Bank to assist small business people. He set up the Agricultural Development Bank to assist farmers, and the Mortgage Finance Bank to assist homeowners and all of that. And when he died and Mr. Hoyt became president, Mr. Hoyt allowed the external agencies, the Americans and them, to impose this, and the IMF World Bank imposed neoliberal economics on us. And from then to now, every government, successive government, have gone along with it. Every government. And what we have found is that wealth is concentrated in a few. 16 families in Guyana. 16 families in Guyana control the amount of land they control. If you add all up, you can build homes about 350,000 persons. So, and that opposition leader you're talking about is part of that class. Is part of that class that acquired tremendous wealth on the both, when both parties, when the APNU led by the People's National Congress was in power and the present PDP government, they benefited from both. Because let me tell you what they did. And this is not just about that leader and his family or the business. This is what these 16 powerful families do and other big business people. When it's the elections, coming on to elections, they give millions of dollars to both parties, to the major parties. This is what they do. They have 2 envelopes with millions. When I tell you millions, millions, they give to both parties. So whichever, whether it's the PPP or APNU, whoever gets into office, they repay these big business people through cheap lands, putting them on boards, concessions, tax breaks, and the contracts. That's what they do. So what you have is a falling out. It's a falling out of the political elites with a very powerful business player, because they supported them all the years. But what's interesting is that this new leader of the opposition, he keeps pointing at the government and pointing at the government as though the government is the main culprit. The main culprit here is the United States government. Exactly. But they're not saying anything about the US. Nobody wants to antagonize the US. Nobody. The US is the big elephant in the room that nobody points to, because they will be. So they're hoping that by not hitting at the US, and the US plays games, because the US ambassador came out and she said, well, if he becomes the leader of the opposition, we'll have to see how we can work around that and all that. She's gone silent. Because at the end of the day, you know it, my brother, the Americans, they have no permanent friends and no permanent enemies.
You're right.
And I suspect, this is what I believe. I believe that this new opposition leader and his party is going to go after the Chinese businesses and the economic and trade ties that we have with China. I believe they're going to do a lot of China bashing in order to appease the Americans. I think this is what they're going to do, because they're not going to get the China bashing from APNU or the China bashing from the PPP. They're not going to get that. So they are going to take that Marco Rubio line in Guyana.
Or is this
purely for survival and opportunistic reason, because they're not ideologically driven. They don't have an ideology. And I think that the fundamental purpose for entering into the political arena is hoping that if you get elected, then the sanctions, the Americans will not be able to touch you. So if they decide to extradite you, the people will hit the street. Well, as I said, I have no problem when they're going to extradite him, if they do, and the people hit the street. Yes, you can hit the street. And if they're going to direct their anger, that's not a problem. But direct your anger not at the Chinese businesses or other people's businesses. Direct your anger at the U.S. Embassy. Go and march on the United States Embassy, because those are the culprits. But you are not going to see that. You will never see that.
Yeah.
What about, do you think, Mr. Perr, that this is a distraction because of what is happening with, the whole matter of the war on Venezuela? So the United States is using a lot of distractions to distract us from the real thing that is ahead of us. Can you
Definitely.
hear me?
You know there was a bombing. You know there was a bombing in Georgetown.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Could you
Now,
elaborate on that?
well, the
Am I
bombing.
being heard?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. The A mobile gas station was bombed. And what's interesting is there's another gas station down the road, just a corner away. Guyana Oil Company. That was that touch. Interesting, just as mobile, which is linked to ExxonMobil. Now the bomber, I mean, if you look at the way that this guy operated, it was like if he operated in such a way like he wanted to be caught.
Mm-hmm.
Good. And something is just not right. A number of people have been
Yes.
arrested, and they said that the mastermind confessed it. They said he came in the day before. He came from some part in the northwest of Guyana and came into Guyana. But when you look at it, it looked very amateurish. It's not the type of operation that any state agency will carry out, in any intelligence agency of any state, whether it's I don't know, the Venezuela or what. But you're hearing what is being peddled is maybe the Venezuelans, maybe Maduro's behind it. Good. But there are some people who think so. My take on it is, what I found interesting is that the bombing happened in the month of October, just a couple of days away from on October the 6th, when the Air Cubana plane was bombed in October, where we lost 11 Guyanese. I believe that bombing was a distraction, and I do not believe that the persons that they hold really have anything to do with it. I think there is much more to it than what we are seeing. There's much more. I don't pretend to have the answers, but something is not right. And a former top military officer said that something just is not right. He was saying, the way the bomb operated and everything. So we don't know who really is up to this. There is all sorts of speculation. People are saying all sorts of things, but we're waiting, we're looking.
Now, we're seeing also that the Venezuelans who had the TPS in the United States are going to be mass deported back to Venezuela, according to Trump. What sort of disaster could that spread to the region, be Trinidad, maybe Dominican Republic, and other countries in the surrounding areas? Do you think that could be a disaster in the waiting also? Or these Venezuelans being returned, being deported back? Mr. Corbin?
But I am not sure. I am not sure how many of those. We have to be very careful. I'm not sure how many of those people that they're deporting are actually Venezuelans. And
yes,
it's up to the final say will will rest with the government of Venezuela to determine who Venezuelans and who are not, because they've sent some of the people they've sent back to countries are not from those countries.
That's a good point. And the CIA using
they've deported people to El Salvador. They've deported many people to El Salvador, and those people they're not from El Salvador.
Correct. Mr. Corbin, what do you think? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Perr. Finish your statement.
No, that's okay. I'll just stop for this.
No, go ahead if you're finished. I was. You can finish your thought. I think sometimes I'm not hearing when you're finishing. So go ahead, finish with your statement.
No, I'm saying, there is evidence that hundreds of persons, that were deported to El Salvador are not from El Salvador.
Yes.
And they're sending people, they're dumping people. Trump is actually quietly, I think it started, though we're not hearing much about it, sending a number of sending people to Africa.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing that.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, all I'm saying is the Venezuelans, you just can't pack up. just take people who might be used deliberately to destabilize a country and just drop them in that country.
Yes, but that what they want to do? Is that the agenda, that they want to destabilize Maduro's government, so they're sending them back to do so?
Yeah, exactly.
And you-
Exactly. That why would you definitely?
What do you think, Mr. Corbin?
Well, based on past history of the CIA operatives with regard to with certain countries, whenever there has been a situation that has presented itself for deportation of nationals of a country that the United States has a particular interest in overthrowing, they have usually included in the deportation well-trained CIA operatives.
Mm-hmm.
So you may have Venezuelan nationals that have been willing to take a bribe and be trained by the CIA to conduct counterinsurgency within the country and to create destabilization situations and be CIA agents. And this is what Maduro is
Yes.
fully aware of.
That's
Maduro
Yes.
is fully aware of this, and one of the examples that we have seen right here in our Caribbean region is Cuba. The United States has
Yes.
deported Cuban nationals back into the country, and they have turned out to be CIA operatives trained in Langley.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, the most important thing that Mr. Maduro is fully aware of, and that the entire military establishment is fully aware of, is that the opportunity exists that if the Venezuelan regime decides to say yes to this reimportation or retransfer of Venezuelan nationals, they have to be extremely carefully vetted upon arrival to find out who is who and
Yes.
who is who, whose loyalty lies where. Because at the end of the day, you can say, right,
Yes.
okay, we're going to let in, say, 6,000 operatives. 1,000 of those could be CIA trained operatives with communications,
Correct.
waiting, and so on and so forth. And then all of a sudden, now you have a destabilization tactic happening. This has also taken place more recently within Iran. Within Iran, there were a lot of Iranians that had gone into Azerbaijan, fleeing ethnic tensions within northern Baluchistan of Iran, and they went into Azerbaijan in order to seek refuge there. Well, the Mossad pounced upon that situation and trained all of them to be counter-Iranian operatives and sent them back into the country. And they were the ones that used forward operating locations for drones and so on to carry out the recent attacks against government officials. So it's an extremely dangerous situation that Mr. Maduro finds himself in as the president of Venezuela, because if he allows the United States of America to exploit that opportunity for nefarious purposes of destabilization, exactly what we were discussing last week, where we would say that the United States is pulling back and everybody would breathe a sigh of relief, but yet, okay, yeah, we're going to send back repatriate some Venezuelans to the country, which may be seen in the geopolitical context as a gesture of goodwill, but really and truly, it's a Trojan horse, because you're sending CIA trained operatives back into the country to execute precisely what you couldn't do militarily.
Absolutely.
No,
Absolutely. And I'm wondering. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Perro.
Fred, I agree with Fred. He's right. I'll give you an example. After when the Americans invaded Afghanistan,
Mm-hmm.
there were a lot of Arab fighters who were fighting for Al Qaeda. They were recruited by the Saudis, and many of them were trained by the Pakistan intelligence service. Many of these Arab fighters came from Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, and those countries. But the majority there was a lot of them, some came from Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and so on. But a lot came from Algeria. And then there was also a few, not many, from Libya.
Yes.
When they were captured, the Americans had this rendition program where they start moving them to places. Some were tortured and all that. and they were working with the intelligence services of a number of Arab countries to get these fighters, these former fighters, back to their countries, right? So Libya took in a number of them because they were Libyans. And Gaddafi said, well, where you want them to go? They're Libyans. So they came home. He said, if you have disagreements, and so we have the People's Congresses, we have democratic assemblies for you to express your views and all of that. And many of them gave up and so, but you know what happened? Many were there quietly working with the CIA.
Mm-hmm.
They were in touch with the CIA. And when the so-called Arab Spring started, they were the guys in the front line.
Mm-hmm.
And the CIA was in the Nafusa Mountains, and they started what was meant to be a simple protest, right? And Gaddafi told the people to protest against the bureaucracy in the area, protest. But then things got out of hand, and the intelligence services said, no, something is wrong here. They started shooting. But apart from what happened, they played a strategic role in the overthrow of Libya. But let's go to Algeria, where you had the war that went on for years by that armed group, the FIS.
Yes.
They armed the GIA, the armed Islamic group, which was linked to the FIS, the Front for Islamic Salvation, that waged a war against the Algerian government, and thousands died. Many of those fighters, many of those who were in those pseudo jihadists, had their training in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them were trained by the Pakistani intelligence and the CIA, and all of them, they were trained. So, as Fred pointed out, these people that you would be sending back, how many of them would be CIA assets?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we experienced ourselves in operating in northern Waziristan was seeing the transfer of people across the border, because northern Waziristan in that area of Afghanistan border and so on is completely and totally unregulated. It's open country.
That's true.
Completely open country, and it's one of the most dangerous places on the planet. And we saw the transfer of everything you could think of going into Afghanistan and coming out of it. And at the end of the day, where was the training taking place? The Pakistani IS was training Pakistan Al-Qaeda, and Pakistan Al-Qaeda was going into Afghanistan carrying out missions, carrying in more material and supplies and so on. And when their mission had been accomplished, they come back out, and they usually bring young recruits with them.
That's
people that have been disenfranchised by the United States presence in the country and so on, and came out, were trained in Pakistan, all under CIA supervision, and then sent back in order to keep the war machine going.
Yeah.
Okay, it was a business. This was a business that was being conducted, not in the best interest of solving a political situation, but based upon the immorality of money making and loss of life, because that's basically what war is. So where we have a situation in the Caribbean is that we are in an unenviable position of finding ourselves as a region that not only are we geographically fragmented from north to south, but we find ourselves in a hegemonic vice under the domination of the United States dollar, where the decision that one country makes is viewed by everyone in CARICOM, and if it's a good decision, everybody decides to jump on the bandwagon to try to benefit from it. Whereas if we were to understand that our individual sovereignty and a collective sovereignty as a region could benefit us moving forward in a greater capacity to be able to determine our autonomy as a region, as a unified region in the future, we would stand a far better chance of having more power at negotiating what really works for us and what doesn't. Thereby, disaster capitalism wouldn't have the same command over the region as it does.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that is true. Now, how do you think we can fight back against disaster capitalism now that we know what it is, but are our citizens enlightened enough to understand what dangers and what threats are there for them? Mr. Corbin?
You,
Well,
yeah.
I think one of the, as I've mentioned many, many times, and um, I'm not sure how many of my programs Mr. Pereira has actually listened to, but you would hear me repeating over and over and over again the Free Winds Caribbean Food Security and Regional Development Initiative, which I led the
Yes.
design. I did a 10-year research program across the Caribbean region. Free Winds Caribbean Food Security and Regional Development Initiative was the program that was sponsored to look at every single CARICOM nation and determine the capacity for the equalization of tourism, trade, industry, education, healthcare, and the prospectus for utilities and so on, internet, water, electricity, and so on, all under national projects for that specific country. Every single country had its own list of things and projects to do. High net worth investment for job creation and the consolidation of jobs and national sovereignty. One of the things
Okay.
that one of the things that I designed based upon the Free Winds Caribbean Food Security and Regional Development Initiative ideology was being able to unite the region on not only a common purpose for development for the future, going into the second half of the 21st century, but also unite the region on finance, because that is the hegemonic stranglehold that we have. We are saddled with a hegemonic stranglehold of the United States dollar. And the way that we can fight back as a consolidated, prosperous Caribbean region based on the national sovereignty of the collective consciousness is having our own gold backed finance. Remember, we have four gold producing nations in CARICOM: Guyana, Suriname, Cuba, and Jamaica. All four of those nations possess
Mhm.
gold in abundance. Okay? Cuba as well. All right. At the end of the day, the most important thing is this: is if we have a common Caribbean currency that is valued to the same value as the EC dollar, which is matching the 9 member nation of the OECS. We have all 18 territories of CARICOM being able to trade on an equal platform with equal value on anything across the area of commodity and finance and market value. In addition to that, if we make sure that our common currency on a gold-backed commodity is aligned with payment systems such as what the BRICS countries are now implementing, we can actually allow countries to pay in their own currency, which benefits us. In addition to that, we can take loans in exchange and repay them with our currency. If you are
Mhm.
constantly borrowing the United States dollar and you have to repay the United States dollar, you will never break free of your debt obligations because you spend more time
Yes.
paying the interest on the debt than the actual debt itself. Thereby, if you have a common gold backed Caribbean currency that is allied to a basket of foreign currencies, that is aligned to a payment system that allows your investor to pay in their currency and you can borrow money and pay in your currency, you open up the entire Caribbean region to a level of investment portfolios that is the fifth largest in the Western Hemisphere. I am not an economist.
Yes.
I have no education in banking. I am just using the common sense and the gray matter between my ears that tells me that this is what will work to unify the Caribbean region in ways that we have never seen before. Allied to that, we have the ability to repay our debt no matter what we do, simply because we are sitting on the world's largest oil reserves. Venezuela is only sitting on 25% of the geographical area. The rest is the Caribbean basin, and every single Caribbean country is sitting on the same oil and gas reserves. Okay? So we have the ability to collateralize our wealth. universally across the region to be able to put the Caribbean region on a secure, financial, pragmatic, practically implementable trajectory for the foreseeable future. But yet, we're so enamored with the United States of a dollar, this flag, we want to hang on to this flag for dear life, as if it's the only lifeline that we will ever have. Why are we hanging on to a flag that has historically disenfranchised our region and put us at the disadvantage of the global prosperity model that the same capitalism has outlined?
But Mr. Pereira, I don't know if the capitalism is actually being successful and prosperous for Americans. Americans are now complaining. They're in America right now. People on SNAP program are not able to access monies and food and so forth. So is capitalism even successful or effective for these people also, for the Westerners?
First, I want to agree with what Fred pointed out about CARICOM and the finance system and so on. Many years ago, the Caribbean economist Clive Thomas wrote a paper, and I remember the title. It's called CARICOM is a Paper Tiger. What's sad is that Clive Thomas ended up being a big player in a government that was maintaining neoliberal economic policy. Sad, But when you look across the region, CARICOM, what it means, the only thing, CARICOM, the only meaning CARICOM has to the masses, to the ordinary people in the street, whether it's Guyana, Trinidad, is when there's CARICOM Day, a holiday. Good. And, Fred spoke about, if we listen what Marcus Garvey pointed out and all that. Our political elites are not, I don't think they are really, I don't know that they are really committed to achieving economic independence.
No.
I don't think they have the political will, the courage to do what, we should be doing and what ought to be done. I mean, as I pointed out, when you look at Trinidad, you pointed out the African masses across the region. When you look at Trinidad, you look at Barbados, Jamaica, all those places. Look at who controls the economy. How could you, first of all, I just want to be clear, because people tend to, when you say you take an anti-capitalist line, you're advocating state ownership of everything, and you're there's no. Capitalism, we need to make certain things clear. They've always been a market. The market existed before capitalism. People were doing business and trading before capitalism. Good. But capitalism is not the same or synonymous with all forms of private ownership. Notice that every time there's a major economic crisis, the businesses that suffer and go out of existence are the small and medium-sized businesses. At least Marx understood that inherent in capital has that tendency to concentrate wealth in fewer and fewer hands. And every time there's a crisis, you hear about mergers and acquisitions and buyout and all of that. And as Fred was saying, this is the hegemony of capital, where capitalism extends into every area of human life. Everything becomes a commodity. Everything is treated as exchange value, because it's a higher form of commodity production. Good. So capitalism does not produce primarily to satisfy human needs. It is primarily about profit, and using that profit to accumulate more wealth, maximize more capital accumulation, and what you get is a class of people that dominate the economy. And irrespective, and the state becomes an instrument of that class. And that is why you can keep voting, whether you vote Democrat or Republican, when you vote Labor or Democrat or Republican in the US, or you vote Labor or Conservative in Britain. You do not vote out that class that controls the economic power. You don't. And this is what C. Wright Mills, when he wrote his book in the early 50s, The Power Elite. Wright Mills said that Americans believe that they really have a say in running things because they're allowed to vote. But he said that there is a class, there's an elite that is so powerful that is not accountable. Today, people are calling them about the deep state. Good. But that's something, the deep state is another thing. But we talk about the military industrial complex and all of those. But there's a group of people that is so powerful, not only they're economically powerful, but they shape political decision making. They shape it. They're there. And you hear about people. Yeah. So you have that. So getting back to the region, to CARICOM. Oh, I don't see after so many years that we moved from CARIFTA, Caribbean Free Trade Association, to CARICOM. And I don't see anything meaningful. What have we done? We hold even when it comes to organizing our cultural activities, the Festival of Arts, Carfest, we are failing there. We are failing because this you were talking earlier about it's a cultural battle and an ideological battle as well as religious, which we were talking about earlier. Good. And these alien ideologies, a lot of alien teachings have affected the mindsets of our people. Good. And getting back to when you were talking about the role of religion and so the weaponization of religion and all of that, you have one of the things is you can disarm the human spirit. And you can disarm the human spirit through false teachings and ideologies like what is called fundamentalism, be it Christian fundamentalism, Jewish fundamentalism, or Islamic fundamentalism. And one of the things we are seeing, it is not an accident or just a fluke that you see all of these prosperity preachers. The preachers of this prosperity theology. Good. Who, if you are suffering, if you are poor, if you're not doing well economically or what have you, it is not because of the social and economic structures that they are unjust. It's a personal thing. It's about you. So you need to give. This is the marketization of religion. Good. So everything now is market. It is something to be bought. So they preach this prosperity theology. The more you give, you will prosper and all of that. And that yes, and that they don't notice something with these prosperity preachers. They don't address the social and political and economic issues that affect the human being, and that is why we got to go back to people like Dr. King. We have to go because listen, brother, the sins of a society, the transgressions of a society, are the sum total of each and every sins of each and every one of us when calculated. So Harvey Cox, the American theologian, he wrote a book many years ago called The Secular City. He said, look at the United States. He said, every corner there's a church. Every corner there's a mosque. You go, well, by extension, a mosque. But yet the church is absent. Good. There's a church building on every corner. But yet you have so many people in prison. So many people are divorcing. So many rape, all of that. When you see the culture, right? What is happening? Something is not working because with all the preaching, all this teaching, and then you open the papers and then you see the level of the poverty, crime, social dislocation, all of these things you're witnessing. And then you have to ask the question is, with all this religion, all these mega churches, all these masjids, the imams preaching, and it's not impacting the society. It's not. Then something is radically wrong. Something is wrong.
Yes, and we can look also at the. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Go ahead, Mr. Pearl.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Finish your thought. Finish your thought.
You go to the church, you sit down and you listen to a sermon, or you go into the masjid to pray. And then when you come out, everything. You come back into the world of naked, unbridled capitalism.
I was just saying, though, that the state has a lot of power even over the churches. As if you notice that the CIA reads sermons of pastors, and there are things that you can say, you're allowed to say and not say. So even things that are biblical, and when you pronounce them, they can say it's hate speech, right? So right now we find that our churches are lacking because they're even their speeches in the church, and that's why it's very important that you have a separation of church and state, because you have the state controlling the church, and now people are treating the politicians as if they are the pastors and the priests. So they are worshiping the state and the musicians and the entertainers more than they're worshiping God. What do you have to say about that?
You want Fred, or you want?
Well,
Can you hear me?
to be quite
Can you hear me?
honest, yes, I can.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, to be quite honest with you, religion has become one large mental asylum. Okay? And we have to understand one thing very clearly about religion, is that it has been designed to divide and separate man from God. Because if we understood the power that lies within our own spiritual consciousness, we would realize that we don't have to go into a church and listen to a person who has been indoctrinated with regard to religious philosophy in order to be able to come to the knowledge of our true identity as a created spiritual being. And if we understood that the power that we each embrace and that we have within our own consciousness actually holds more power individually than we have ever experienced in a religious context, our collective consciousness as a people would disband and disassociate itself from religion entirely. But because religion has been used as the instrument of the state to coerce the obedience of the public, we believe that once we hear something on the radio and it's reinforced by television and we hear it from the pulpit on Sunday, that it must be gospel and the doctrine of the state, and whereby we are then led in blind obedience to do whatever the state bids us to do. This is the definition of a mental asylum. This is not the definition of a progressive society. A progressive society would cater towards the individual open-mindedness of the embracing of collective consciousness that each one of us enjoy. I get energy from Mr. Gerald because he is knowledgeable on something. You get energy from me because his energy transfers to me. Energy is very transferable. We have to understand that the collective consciousness being able to be transferred has massive collective power globally and institutionally. We can change the trajectory of institutional decisions if we understand our collective consciousness. But if we're not embracing the energy transfer from truth, knowledge, and education, we cannot find ourselves in a progressive state, and we cannot educate our children as such. We find ourselves floundering when our children are facing us with simple, logical questions born of innocent inquiry, because we're so brainwashed that we don't know how to answer them. Okay? At the end of the day, the most important thing for all of us to recognize is that if we are going to understand the situation that we find ourselves in as a sovereign national community of Caribbean progressive nationals, we have to embrace our collective consciousness with regard to understanding the combat that must be undertaken not only spiritually in a collective consciousness, but also that our heritage, our ancestry, that energy has to be translated into our daily lives. We have not been brought here for no reason. We were brought here through conflict, through oppression, and through all sorts of different things that collated through religion to empower the oppressors to go to lands and bring us to these lands. Religion was behind it all. And when you look at who funded the excursions into Africa for prisoners of war for the Caribbean development, Church of England and the Vatican, those two institutions, religious institutions of the day, are responsible for where we are today in the Caribbean region. My ancestry, Ireland. The Ethnic Cleansing of Ireland by Oliver Cromwell. Religious war. Your ancestors from Africa, religious wars fomented by the Church of England and the Vatican. And it resulted in the Caribbean people that we know today. If we embrace the collective consciousness of the power of where we have come from, we can progressively say the trajectory we want to achieve is one that will take us into a future and a brighter new day for the Caribbean region. But are we thinking critically? Are we thinking critically? We have an example of an organization that has shown us that non-critical thinking can keep the region divided, and that is CARICOM. If there were critical thinkers in CARICOM, if there were critical thinkers in CARICOM, we would not be having this conversation.
Yes, yes. But we do have also differences in economic ideologies, differences in political ideologies that we go to war about too. Right now we're going to war, communism versus capitalism, and that's not religion. So what do you have to say about that? That is not only religion that divides us, but politics, economics, and cultural habits also divides us. Go ahead.
Communism where? Where are you seeing a war with communism?
Well, we had wars, and right now, even right now in the States, people, don't you hear what Trump is saying? That he's trying to get rid of the communists, who he describes as the progressives. So we have had war, and you know that, Corbin.
At the end of the day, you have to be very careful about what Donald Trump says, because he does not understand.
No, it's not only Donald Trump. Corbin, it's not only Donald Trump. That's coming from a far right. He's only repeating what the far right, and there are people in high university seats who are saying the same thing. He's just saying it in a much more, what should I say now, ruffian manner. But you know that, Corbin, that there are lots of intellectuals who believe likewise.
Yeah, the thing is that communism is probably was best achieved. True communism, the closest that was ever achieved to true communism was Adolf Hitler.
No, we're not looking at communism. We're just asking that there are the differences. I'm just citing that and say there are differences in political, economic ideologies.
Right. I understand exactly where you're coming from.
I just want to say, let me say just a few things quickly. One, the term religion was first, not just the term, but the concept of religion, as we know it today, started with the Greeks. And this thing about the separation of the church and state. Now, take for example in Islam. Islamic scholars have never defined Islam as a religion. The term religion was used by others to describe. Islam always defined itself as deen, a way of life. Okay? Mm-hmm. In the African tradition and many indigenous traditions, there was nothing known as religion. The way you organize the economy, the way you organize your village, the way you organize your community, everything was a totality, was seen as, if you want to use that word, religion. In some African communities, they call it the way. The way. Good? So there was no term for religion. So the basis, the foundation of your society was meant to be your religion, if we're going to use that term, that concept. It was your religion, the foundation. And on that foundation, you will put the pillars, your economy, your politics, institutions, everything the way it's organized. Okay? That is how it was meant to be. I do agree. I know that there are people who say, I don't believe I'm not into religion and into spirituality. Well, this is what I say. Religion is like the bottle and spirituality is like the content. But inside. Because they're different spiritualities. I know that there were a lot of wars, a lot of crimes have been committed in the name of religion. Good? Mm-hmm. The Crusaders did what they did. Columbus voyages, many others, even some Muslim rulers, good, deviated from the teachings and they went out and they took over lands and so. But this is it. There were always those who tried to bring them back on the right path. In the Christian tradition, you have liberation theologians. When the Latin American liberation theology started in the late 60s, early 70s, the church, most of them, you look at them, Jose Mirando, Bonino, all of these radical theologians, these revolutionary theologians, who were showing that the gospel and Christ's teachings was that the gospel give the option for the poor. And they were using Marxism. They were not Marxists, but they were using Marxism as a tool when it comes to economic analysis and so. And Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who later became Pope and then resigned, he was the head of the Society for the Preservation of the Doctrine. And he,
Yes.
a lot of those priests excommunicated. When Father Miguel, his name, from the Sandinista, the poet, the one who was the poet, he was a Marinola priest, Father Descota's not Descota, there was another one. Anyhow, when the Pope visited Nicaragua and he extended his hand to shake the Pope's hand, the Pope refused. The Pope gave him a lecture saying that the church role is not to be involved in politics. But this was the same Pope that was supporting the Polish Solidarity Union and Lech Wałęsa and them in the struggle against the pro-Soviet government in Poland. He was backing the Polish struggle. But when it came to the church in Latin America that was standing up, the Sandinistas that was standing up to US imperialism in the so-called backyard, he took a different line, and that was hypocritical. Absolutely hypocritical. So the point I'm making is that we have to understand that everything, you will always find those who cannot destroy something from outside will seek to destroy it from within. And there was a great Iranian sociologist and thinker who was assassinated in Britain by the name of Ali Shariati, a great thinker. He exchanged letters with Franz Fanon. And he wrote a very good piece called True Religion versus False Religion. Right? And you know what he was saying? He was a Muslim, but his theology was quite sophisticated. He was not saying that, look, because I'm a Muslim, my religion is the right religion and your religion is wrong if you're a Christian or if you're a Jew. No. This is what he meant by true religion. He's saying that the scriptures, that the Creator, God, never gave human beings the power to rule over other human beings or to lord it over them. Okay? Good. We have dominion over the bird of the air, the fish of the sea, and the animals. But each and every one of us are meant to be a conscious, self-determining being. Okay? So he said that God is the God of justice. He's the God of truth because it says he's Al-Haq, the truth. He's Adil, justice. And this universe that in the Kemetic tradition, the monotheistic tradition of Pharaoh Akhenaten and them in early Egypt, what the Greeks call Egypt, Kemet, that this universe is constructed on the principles of truth, justice, harmony, and reciprocity. And if you violate it, it will destroy you. It will destroy everything. So he was saying that all those who fight for justice, all those who fight for human dignity, all those who fight for self-determination, all those who fight against racism and oppression, whether you call yourself a Muslim, a Jew, a Christian, or even an atheist, you are in the camp of true religion. And he referred to
that is why, and that is
and he referred to false religion as those who profess, they say, I'm a Muslim, I pray 5 times a day, I'm a Christian, I believe in the saving grace of Jesus, I am a Hebrew, but they support systems that are oppressive, racist, and unjust. Then you are in the camp of false religion. That's how he divided it. And it does Makes sense.
Yes.
So I always say this. I am a believer. I believe that there's a transcendental dimension to all civilizations. I believe in God. I believe that he is independent of his creation. And I believe that he has made himself known all over to various prophets, that many named and many that we don't know their names, right? Having said that, I do believe that history has an end, a culmination. I believe in the end of history too, but not what Francis Fukuyama had in mind.
Yes, says.
I
Yes.
believe in the end
Yes.
of history, right? The culmination of the reign of justice on this earth, and an end to all oppression as it was revealed to the prophets. I believe that. But I also say this, let me end with this. I, as a believer, rather work with anyone. I would work with an atheist who is honest, who's committed to justice, the fight for justice, who goes out there and struggle, than to work with someone who says, who prays 5 times a day, or who goes to church, but then they support systems that are unjust. You know, and
Right.
I like to
The
give the example.
self-righteous.
Yes, the self-righteous. So, personal piety, right? Personal piety and keeping the law is not good enough for salvation or for redemption. It's not. And that the story, my brother Andrew, of the wealthy, rich young leader man who said to Jesus, I kept all the commandments. And Jesus never doubted him, because at least the scriptures did not provide evidence that Jesus, for one moment, doubted him. But he thought that person keeping the commandments was good enough. But Jesus said, look, go and sell your wealth, get rid of what you have, right? Get rid of it, give it to me, and come and follow me. What the man did, he disappeared. He disappeared because he was trapped. He was a slave to his material, to this material world, and to his material wealth. He never understood. He didn't understand the concept of spiritual wealth.
Yes. And yet you had the opposite of Judas, who pretended as if he was trying to help people, right? Rather, he was stealing the money, right? So we have from one extreme to the next. But I think all institutions, whether school or church or the family, they all have their role to play in society. And we need to support them, because, we can't just say, okay, school is not necessary or the family is not necessary. All of these institutions play their role. What we should do is ensure that they follow the law, that we should have laws that regulate these institutions and not for them to overpower one over the other. So to say that nobody should go to church or families not necessary, school is not necessary, I don't necessarily support that. You can have your independent school. You can also decide to stay home if you want to. That's your choice. And nobody should force you to do the opposite. But at the end of the day, I think that all play their role. And I give you a point before we end here. The fact that we're seeing what is happening in the disaster-prone area of Jamaica, for example, and other parts of the world, had it not been for faith that people had, do you think that they'll be able to live with the sort of darkness that they're going through at the moment? What role does their spirituality play in the sufferings that they're going through at the moment? Mr. Pereira? Or Mr. Corbin? Any of you?
I just want to say this. Could you recall, I think when there was that huge earthquake a number of years ago in Haiti, when they had, you remember when they...
Yes,
there was
2010.
Yeah. Pat Robinson. You remember Pat Robinson?
Yes.
He's one of those televangelists. Pat Robinson said, this is a man who had invested. He owned mines in Angola. And he was one who lobbied for the US Congress to support UNITA, the murderous group UNITA, that was killing villagers and attacking troops of the Angolan government and so on. You know what he said about Haiti when they had that earthquake? He said, "Oh,
Yeah, I remember
they're suffering. They're
the
suffering
devil.
because, yeah, because of the devil. Yeah, you know, they did a thing, that voodoo that they have down there. They're, you know." But
Hmm.
what he, yeah, he didn't understand this is that what's interesting is, do you know about many Haitians are Roman Catholics, right? Many
Yeah.
Haitians.
Hmm.
Jean Bertrand Aristide, who the Haitians elected, was a Roman Catholic priest. Good. He was a Roman Catholic priest. And Haitians will have voodoo ceremonies on Fridays or Saturday, and then they go to church on Sunday because
There's no
they,
difference.
there's no difference. That's right. So, but he said that, you know. So what I'm saying is, you know, I'm just showing you how these things, how people
Hmm.
could just try to justify it. But Pat Robertson would never say, "Well, look, the problem with Haiti has to do with capitalists underdevelopment, capitalist rape of that
Yes.
place, of that country." He does
Hmm.
not job it because
Correct.
he invested
Yes.
in companies that were raping Angola. So these guys will come up with all sorts of things, and you have people who, if you have that so-called that fundamentalist mindset, you will believe that this thing has nothing to do. There's no socio-economic dimension to this, right? This is something metaphysical.
Yes.
So when we get back to the, you look now at this Hurricane Melissa that destroyed Jamaica, went into Cuba, and went into Haiti.
Cuba.
Look at Cuba. How
Hmm.
many people died in Cuba? Check it out. Right? Cuba could teach the world how to manage disasters and prepare for it.
You're correct.
You know, because they've been good. And then you look at what happened in Haiti, and then you look, and with Cuba, with all the years of this embargo and
Hmm.
sanctions, and yet
Hmm.
you can have that hurricane that devastated Jamaica, and then
Hmm.
Haiti, and then you look at Cuba, and no loss of lives, just property, but the way the community and Cuba as a country, how they're mobilized to deal with it before it hits the country, before the hurricane hit, and after. But you don't see that in Haiti, or you don't see it in Jamaica. So it is not a metaphysical thing. It's not a metaphysical thing. It has to do with the system. It has to do with the
Hmm.
system.
I raised
Hmm.
that question on an earlier our podcast this morning. Is that I was
Yes.
pointing out to Andrew where the Inter American Development Bank arrived in Jamaica in July of this year and did a hurricane disaster relief simulation exercise,
Mhm.
and
Hmm.
Jamaica got hit in October. So what does that tell you?
Yes.
That
That's
tells
true.
you
That's true.
that,
I
that
recall. You're right.
yeah, this is a pre-planned organization, and we still haven't learned anything from it because we still don't know how to respond to it. So who is benefiting who? This is
Wow.
a classic example
That's
of
right.
disaster capitalism, where
That's
we
right.
tell you we're going to destroy your country, we
Yeah.
make you believe that you're equipped to handle it,
Mhm.
but at the end of the day, when it does happen, you're still out to lunch.
Yeah.
We can end here,
I
Mr.
recall
Corbin.
that.
Those
That
words
is
were
true.
really
I remember that.
precise.
I remember that. That is true what he
Yes.
said. I
Your final
remember. I
thoughts, Mr.
recall.
Ferrero. Yes.
No, I'm saying
Yeah. Your
that
final
Fred is
thoughts,
right.
Mr. Ferrero.
I can recall that.
Yes. Your final thoughts. We're ending here. Your final thoughts, Mr. Ferrero, and then Mr. Corbin.
Look, my brother, at the end of the day, we have to go capitalism. We have to make capitalism history. We cannot carry on with an economic arrangement that keeps wealth in the hands of a few. It doesn't work. We've seen, if you look at the planet over the past, I think today there is 360, the wealth of 360 billionaires. The equivalent of it is equivalent to the total, if you add up the wealth of so many millions of people. It is not working. The system is not working. It's not sustainable.
Hmm.
Poverty has been on the increase. The only country we have seen that has been able to eradicate uh, brutal poverty and bring it right down within that year is the Chinese, is China. No one can deny that.
Hmm.
The Chinese have
Hmm.
tremendously that. But if you look in because the Chinese allow individual capitalists operate, but they don't buy up the land, they don't have political power, they don't shape the economy as such, right? That is planned. The state directed, the Communist Party leads. But you look at all over where this neoliberal economics was implemented, and things just get worse and worse. So back to the Caribbean, we have to go beyond it. And as you know, we have to have the courage, we have to stand up with one voice. We have to stand up and tell those to the elephant in the room, to tell the empire that we must not be, you cannot intimidate us. At the end of the day, right? We are independent and meant to be at least independent and sovereign nation states. We have to go beyond this liberal economic arrangement. We have to find a new, as Fred pointed out, we have to find a new financial arrangement. Nyerere and all of those guys way back, you remember when they were talking about the new international economic order, NIO. Yeah, we're going right back. We have to revisit that, but we don't seem to be able to learn from the past and the mistakes. We just keep making the same mistake, and it shows that we don't know our history. We're not looking at our history. We're not looking at it. So we continue to flounder. We keep making the same blunders, and we are going nowhere. Nowhere.
Yeah. You're correct. Mr. Corbin?
Well, we have to recognize that historically, the Caribbean region has been apathetic towards progress in every respect, simply because we believe that as long as we have the white man turning up to lay in our beaches and stay in our hotels and eat our food and dance salsa and samba and
Merengue.
and merengue and do all of the karaoke and stuff and so on and enjoy our tourism cultural products, that all will be right with the world. Okay?
Correct.
And as long as somebody got lalaki and saltfish and you have some flying fish and things and so on, that no bacchanal happening here, Gassa. Okay? At the end of the day, the situation comes down to this. That no longer works. Okay?
Right.
Yes.
Because we are at a situation where our very identity as Caribbean people is now an existential threat.
Right.
Because we
Yes.
have allowed ourselves to be hanging on to the coattails of a suicidal neoliberal ideology, which only will lead to disaster and death. And at the end of the day, the programs that are put in place by the three-letter organizations, the unelected three-letter organizations, PAHO and World Health Organization, and all the rest of these criminal entities have come into the region and bled us dry of the brain power to think for ourselves. So you know what? It's going to come down to critical thinking. Unfortunately, there are no critical thinkers in CARICOM. So you know what we have to do? We have to mobilize the critical thinkers of the region. And how do we do that? We actually have to physically arrive in every single one of our countries, okay, and hold seminars and symposiums and conferences on critical thinking for Caribbean prosperity. And the Free Winds Caribbean Food Security and Regional Development Initiative only has to be taken off of the shelf and presented for funding. And everything in that will allow critical thinkers to be able to say, I want a piece of this, I want a piece of that. And you can actually take the entire Free Winds model and distribute it across the region as an effervescent status of progress. Each country can take what has been designed for them and implement it. I can hand a dossier an inch and a half thick to the government of Belize and say, that's what we suggest. I'm not telling you what to do. We're just suggesting this based on hard data. We can go to the government of the British Virgin Islands and say, here's what we suggest. Have a read of this. We can go to Antigua. Antigua is of particular interest because they have just allowed a Chinese billionaire to divide part of their country and form a new country within their own territory. This is neocolonialism at its worst. okay, where you're going to allow a foreign entity to come in and subdivide your very nation in order to create an enclave of the Chinese ideology within a Caribbean CARICOM state. Hello, that's where we draw the line. Okay, unfortunately, you're dealing with corrupt individuals. You're dealing with people who understand money laundering and finance very, very well indeed, and can manipulate the system in their best interests. That's what we have going on in Antigua. What we have to understand is that if we take what we have and we work it in the correct ways with critical thinking, and we understand the tremendous value of our Caribbean people, we are not talking about an ignorant society. We're talking about a highly skilled, sovereign national society of very, very intelligent and talented people. All they need is the opportunity, and we must work towards creating the opportunity. We can do that.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. And I must applaud you guys for keeping the floor, for keeping the live up when I experienced a little difficulty. Thank you, Mr. Gerald Pereira and Mr. Corbin. And I want you guys to tell me, Mr. Pereira or Mr. Corbin, what do you think is a very important topic that we need to explore? Maybe for next week or week after next, or whenever you guys are available. What do you think is something that is urgent now that needs to be spoken about? Mr. Pereira?
There's so many things that is taking place. I could send you a message or email.
You could send me an email, right? You could send me an email. Both of you. And we talk a lot on WhatsApp.
Send it to Fred.
Yes.
Yes, he can send.
Yes, and Mr. Corbin. Yeah, he's on my WhatsApp, so we can talk. So thank you so much for joining, ladies and gentlemen. And you can also suggest your topics too. Those of you who are in the chat, so that we will also take note of that, because we are here for you, the audience, listening and watching audience. So thank you so much for joining, and we will have another discussion next Sunday. See you then.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, brother. Keep up the good work.
Good.
Same here. Thank you so much, sir. Bye-bye.